BYU gets 2 quad 1 wins in the same week. What's been the biggest surprise so far on offense? Plus, an upcoming game against Arizona. How important of a matchup is this game for BYU? And is Dallin Hall underrated? We'll dive into that coming up on the Loyal Cougars podcast. Hello and welcome to the Aptive Podcast Studio. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast, and I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, joined today by a guy that's been kind of making the rounds on social media, on podcasts. He's on BYU TV now. The former human flamethrower for the BYU Cougars, Jonathan Tavernari. Welcome, Jonathan. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you having me, Jake. Thank you.
So you obviously have, had a lot of great takes, I think, this year about BYU basketball, but this week we're coming off of 2 great wins, I think, for BYU, with Baylor at home and UCF on the road. And, let's start with kind of the biggest surprise, I think, so far this season, and specifically this week, which is Moet Mag. And I want to start with something that was said on Cougar Board. This is a Cougar Board partnered podcast. And Ox Coug said, biggest surprise for me this year, Mag's offensive upside. Based on his pre-BYU profile, I would not have predicted him ever leading us in scoring or putting up 20 points in a game or hitting clutch threes, hoping that it indicates development and progression on his part, not just a hot streak that will cool down, makes a potential big difference in what the team can achieve this year if he sustains it. And I agree. I actually think Mag, coming into this season, everyone knew he was going to be this kind of defensive prowess. And to start the year off, he actually didn't get very many minutes. And I thought that was a mistake. Honestly, I don't think a lot of BYU fans really knew how good he could be. But when he came in, he showed how well he could play defensively. The offense has been a huge surprise. What have you seen in his offensive game that has allowed him to progress as much as he has offensively?
Well, it's a long season. And it reminds me a lot of my freshman year, where I didn't get any playing time until conference came around. And that was because I was able to hold my own on the post. And then I started making shots left and right, what got Mag to get minutes was defense. And the easiest way that you can get playing time, if you're a rotation guy, is making sure you're on the floor when the team is getting stops, and you are on the floor when good things are happening on offense. Coaches are superstitious. Now, obviously, I don't want to say that, Kevin Young has a rabbit's foot or things like that. But there is a consistency that coaches look for on why were we on a run? What was working? What needs to happen here? And Mag has been a massive part of that success. And, obviously, my wife always says good choices come from experience. Experience comes from bad choices. Now, I don't want to say that Mag made bad choices. But what I'm saying is he's been there. He's done that. He's gotten experience. And he stuck with it and just waited for his time. And now he's there. And, I'll say this. Obviously, I got to shoot threes, beyond BYU for a living. I was a McDonald's All-American nominee because of my shooting. But consistent 3-point making is just about hard work and practice. It's just about putting in the time over and over. And people are just not willing to do it, right? And so for Mag, the way, people say, well, I can't believe that he's this 3-point shooting. The easiest thing for you to do as an offensive player is to learn how to shoot. If you really are willing to put in the time, and he is, right? And so it's been great to see his spark off the bench. And here's my favorite thing about Mag, Jake. He is not scoring by forcing shots, right? He is not dribbling into shots and taking 4, 5, 6 dribbles, to create a shot. It's catch and shoot, catch, pump fake, 1 dribble, pull up. It's simple stuff. It's effective stuff, right? And it's paying off because, one, BYU is benefiting tremendously from what he's doing, but he is also giving himself a chance to be on the spotlight. And a massive game from him on Saturday. And even the one against Baylor, playing defense against, 2 human torch guys. in Edgecombe and Wright, and so it's been a pleasant surprise to see his uprising.
Yeah, in the NBA, they refer to these guys as 3-and-D guys. And it's nice. It's got to be nice as a head coach with Kevin Young, having a guy that you can put on their best offensive player. You mentioned Edgecombe. He, for all intents and purposes, and now Edgecombe, I think he scored a lot of points. He still got his points.
Hey,
but
quality offense, the very best offense will always beat a quality defense. And so we can also expect a lottery pick, a top 5 guy in the upcoming draft, to just lay an offer, especially when you have the ball in your hands and you shoot as much. And so I want to point that out because he's a volume guy, but I mean, Mag did great defending him.
Absolutely. And I was going to say that I actually think Edgecombe got most of his points when Mag had to switch off because of screens. I think when Mag was guarding Edgecombe struggled. And at the very least, I think Mag tired him out. And you mentioned his ability to turn defense into offense. I think that's huge. And I think that's honestly pretty understated when you look at college basketball and honestly NBA as well. I think when you get defensive stops, it's so much easier to score on offense. And when you score on offense, it makes it so much easier to get defensive stops. It's this kind of snowball effect. And Mag is pivotal, I think, in kind of initiating that snowball. He's got 32 minutes against Baylor, 28 against UCF, 32 obviously with overtime. And those are his highest minutes this season. And he's played most of crunch time against UCF. He had 19 points and 5 assists. And as you mentioned, defending VJ Edgecombe as well as anybody could. Now, JT, I've got a comparison for the NBA and a comparison for a former BYU player for fans to maybe reference. And this is relevant, I think, to you because the comp I have for a former BYU player is Charles Abuo. And Charles, as we know, was a guy that could defend really well. He could shoot really well. He wasn't necessarily a massive ball handler, right? So to me, Mag kind of fits that mold. And I'll give you an NBA comp as well. Royce O'Neal. And I don't know. I think you're Lakers.
I will say this. Just going back on the Edgecombe and Wright thing. How did Baylor get back in the game? They kept playing pick and roll, and whoever did not have Mag attacked that guy.
Yeah.
And so if it was Edgecombe that was guarded by Mag, Wright took over. When Wright started taking over and Mag switched, VJ started taking over. And so I think that's a phenomenal point. They were attacking whoever was not being guarded by Mag. With the Charles comparison, I don't disagree. I don't know if I also fully agree completely, but I think the Royce O'Neal is a little bit more on point. Charles was a physical specimen.
Yeah.
And Charles may as well be the best athlete that BYU basketball has ever had. And the only one I would put close to Charles is Mike Hall. And so, but just because of the way that they play, I do think the Royce O'Neal is a little bit more of a fitting comparison, right? Charles was banging up inside a lot and he was dunking and putting it down. Whereas Royce O'Neal is a little bit more on the finesse side of things of staying on the perimeter. And so I agree with you on the Royce O'Neal comparison. And, the craziest thing about Kevin Young is he got guys now believing they can go to the NBA and buying into this whole thing, along with Mag. Richie Saunders is another guy that you're like, well, jeepers, geez Louise, mister, where did that come from?
I know.
And, and just the way that Richie's playing and scouts are talking about him. If he keeps this up, Jake, he's going to have to make a tough decision come April. And, nobody saw that coming. Richie put a ton of time in the summer. I saw with my own eyes. And so, this is fantastic to see.
I think his performances against Baylor and UCF have kind of been understated in the sense that, Cannon Catchings took over the Baylor game. I think Richie had kind of a lull moment against UCF. He started off pretty hot. He cooled off quite a bit in the middle of the game, but then he scored 11 of his 22 points in the final 8 minutes of that game. And all of those 11 points were pivotal. Now on Cougar Board, Brandon Blue Blood said, Richie Saunders is everything that is good in sports. Unreal hustle at all times, great athletic ability, but always seeing what he can do better. And he's a team player who deflects praise onto his teammates and stresses team. And you kind of saw that during the post-game interview with the ESPN guys. He was just so down to earth. And for a guy who's as physical, right, and a guy who can kind of emotionally get into a game as much as he does, he's just so down to earth and willing to give praise to his teammates. We've talked about Richie Saunders on this podcast pretty much all season in terms of his production, his ability to get points when he wants them. He's third in scoring in the conference. He's first in 3-point percentage, also first in 3 points per game. Here's what I find interesting as far as where he ranks in the conference as far as shooting. He is third in the conference in field goal percentage, with half of his shots coming from beyond the arc. When you look at field goal percentage leaders in any league, in any conference, they are typically going to be big guys, right? You're going to see centers and forwards who get inside and they get high efficiency shots at the rim. You rarely see a guard who shoots takes half of his shots from beyond the arc, ranking in the top 3 or 5 like Richie does.
Yeah. So what I will say is, if you start with the Baylor game, and then, you mentioned the 22 points he had against UCF, but in the Baylor game, everybody was like, oh man, Richie's missing all of these bunnies and missing this and missing that. He ended up with 17 points at the end of the game. With UCF, he went through a very long period that he was cooled down. Brother had 22 points for the game. And so this is the type of consistency that scouts are looking for, that professional coaches are looking for. And, just his efficiency to me is the most impressive thing. Now, the way that he's scoring the ball, yes, he's right now, he's very similar to a 3-and-D guy, but with a very solid one dribble pull up or that little floater that he tosses, it's very efficient. And I'll tell you, Jake, with God as my witness that I saw with my own eyes, he worked on every single one of those shots to exhaustion in the summertime. Now, I was working with Dallin, with Yegor, with Trevin. I was working with Trey. I was working with Mihailo. I had a couple of other people that I was working with that they were there, Brody Kozlowski. And I always got to the gym a little bit earlier so I can just be there and sit down for a minute, respond to any emails, put my cell phone pause for a couple of hours. Richie was always the first guy to get to the floor. I'm not exaggerating. He was always the first one at the annex. On Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, most of the days that I was down there, he was always there. And every single one of the moves that you're talking about, the 3-point shooting, the penetrating and attacking, the little floater, consistency, sprinting. He was doing most of it with his dad, which is the coolest thing in the world. But he was drenched in sweat. And, I told him over and over again, I'm like, Richie, look, obviously I'm here. I'm doing this out of my only free will. I want to help the guys, passing a little bit of experience. Chris Burgess and Kevin have given me the space and to do this. You're welcome to work out with us. And he was always very appreciative. Hey, JT, you got it. Thanks. And obviously we know each other. But my gosh, what a work ethic. And there's no secret ingredient, right? I say this all the time because I relate to my own boy. When Kung Fu Panda is beating the crap out of Tai Lung at the very first movie, Tai Lung gets the dragon scroll. He's like, what the crap is this? What is happening? And then Po was like, well, I didn't get it at first either. It took me a minute. And there's no secret ingredient. There's nothing that beats hard work and effort and consistency. And, and we're seeing it from Rich right now.
Yeah. And the secret ingredient is really no secret, which is just hard work. Right. And that's what, that story doesn't surprise me because we see that on the floor, Richie's desire to get better, even in games, and it's paying off, obviously. What I wanted to ask you, and this is a little bit off topic, but I had Hamahe Muli on a few weeks ago, and he talked about how you and Kristen Kozlowski were kind of breaking down the offense. And at the time, the offense was really struggling. And he and I had kind of talked about how the guards weren't really able to penetrate. And I kind of assumed or kind of analyzed that it seemed like the screens being set weren't very effective. Defenders were going underneath it, or the big that was defending the screener was really sagging off so that the guard could not get inside. And I thought the floater game, Richie was a big part of that, really kind of opened up that offense to where they didn't feel like they had to penetrate to get to the rim. They just had to penetrate to get a good floater shot or pull up from the free throw line. Have you noticed them working on that, or have you kind of seen that kind of shift in mentality where it seemed like really against Colorado, or maybe Cincinnati, that floater game really started opening up and it started kind of clicking for the guards?
Well, so I will say this, I have been long of the opinion that Trevin Knell needed to start, not because of my relationship with Trevin, not because of how close we are, not because of anything like that, but from a pure basketball perspective, what does Yegor and Richie need to operate? What does Keba and Foos need to be successful? They need space. And so, Trevin has ups and downs on shooting, like we all have. You know what I mean? Like it's part of the game. But when you have a known lethal shooter on the corner or on the top of the wing, you get played, the defense has to adjust. And Trevin showed that at UCF. If you let him have a comfortable rhythm with space, is going to knock it down. And so I would probably say that, the adjustment of having him being in the starting lineup, even when Dallin Hall comes in, and Dallin is there with Mag, who you have to respect his shot now. Now you're looking at situations where you have more space to operate. Now, the other thing, too, that I think, to me, is the biggest elephant in the room that's now, slowly making its way out, has been the rotation. Not that that's a problem or an issue or Kevin Young is wrong, but Kevin had not yet solidified a rotation with guys that he feels are consistent. But it feels like from the last 3-4 games, ever since the Utah loss with Colorado, with Cincinnati, with Baylor, and now with and then with UCF, that's 4 wins in a row that BYU has. And it feels like they have a consistent rotation with Yegor, with Richie, with Trevin, with Mag, and then with Keba, and then Foos comes off the bench, and Dallin comes off the bench. And then you're looking at perhaps Trey comes off the bench a little bit. And then, you're looking at possibly Mihailo. But now you have somewhat of a rotation consistency, which Kevin hadn't had. But not because he's not good, because that would be ludicrous and almost sacrilegious to say, but because you need time. And it feels like they're peaking at the right time. And so all of that combined, it doesn't apply only to the pick and roll that they are attacking, off the top of the key or on the wings, but applies to defensive rotation, finishing up games and finishing up halves and games with your veterans on. And so all of this has come from more time and the chemistry that all of these guys have had, and also the coaching staff has had with these guys.
Yeah. Another guy that seems to be benefiting from this kind of solidified rotation is Keba. And for him to have 10 points, 7 rebounds, 2 blocks, I thought he had 3 blocks. One was called for a foul at the end of the game. He's really seeming to kind of break out of his shell. Now, he played really well with Utah last year. And so I don't think this comes as a surprise, at least like statistically, but it seems like earlier on in the year, he and really any of the guards, but Yegor was kind of a big part of this. They just never really could get on the same page. And now Yegor's finding him. And it's not just Yegor, it's Mag, it's Trevin, it's Richie. Everyone seems to be finding him in the right spot. And, I think Keba has a very particular spot, right? Like if he's not within 5 feet of the hoop, he's uncomfortable, at least trying to score. And, they're getting him cutting to the basket. What I loved about Keba was he just didn't back down at the end of the game when guys were jawing at him, even at the handshake line. And, you obviously wouldn't know anything about having any sort of contention at the handshake line. But what did you like about Keba? And, what was your kind of observation of what happened in the handshake line. And does it happen very often?
So I will say this. We obviously know what a monster of a defensive presence Keba is. That has never been in question. And so where I think I speak for most fans and people around the program, we hoped that his offensive impact would be a little bit bigger, and not just on pick and roll, but that, once that he made a few, which is, a short roll after the pick and roll, and you hit him and he is at the free throw line, maybe a step further, and he hits his floater. And that's something that you haven't seen it from him consistently. And you saw against UCF. I love that he should, but let's also be realistic about standing up. How many people on God's green earth are going to stand up for Keba and try to say something and jaw him? Let's be realistic. There's not many of those walking around.
Yeah.
And so, he stood his ground. And, obviously the encounter I had with Steve Alford when he was at New Mexico in my senior year. But it happens, right? I mean, you're asking highly emotional, physical, competitive people that just got done getting their butts kicked and go, hey, great job, appreciate you, good to see you, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it takes a special level of control. And, in my career, I think I played 130, 40 games at BYU. That only happened as once to someone that, graduated as the winningest player in program history. Jimmer's the one that broke all of my 3 records and, a lot of my individual accolades. And so it is, knowing myself, the fact that it only happened once is crazy. But it happens, right? And the team surrounded him and had his back. And so you can kind of feel a tide turning. I thought Saturday's game against UCF was a huge step. Well, it was a checkpoint. Let's put it that way. I thought it was a huge checkpoint to get a measure of where this team is. Now, this team, to me, today, it's an NCAA tournament team. How far they can go, well, that's a different story. If we knew it, we'll all be millionaires and we wouldn't be doing this podcast.
Well, Joe Lunardi is one of the best at it, and he probably is a millionaire.
Well, but what I'm saying is predict where they're going to be in terms of how far they're going to go into the tournament.
Yep.
And I will say this, lo and behold, that these dudes beat Arizona tomorrow, boy, then if you're a Big 12 team, you better be like, well, dang, I thought we could get a BYU here at home. Oh, dang, I thought that was a road win that we could potentially win. And that, that concept absolutely goes out of the window because this is a dangerous team, man. And 4-0, I'm going to be doing the game tomorrow at BYU TV, but 4-0 coming back to the magical Marriott Center with a top 15, top 20 team in the country, and they're licking their chops. I'm just getting goosebumps thinking about being in the Marriott Center tomorrow, and it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, it's wild to think that literally 2 weeks ago, we were down and out, right? We felt like this season was not lost, but we felt like it was virtually out of reach with who BYU had coming up on the schedule, and Arizona was a big part of that. But the fact that they've gone 4-0 with the schedule they've had, and the chance now to come home where they've played really well and beat a Wildcat team that is also pretty hot, would be monumental. And we're going to talk about the impact kind of more so of that game coming up on the Loyal Cougars podcast, so stick around. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans? The Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are the perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. This episode is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv believes every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptiv will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptiv is why. Visit goaptiv.com/loyalcougars or call 966-4787 and mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's goaptive.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787. Get home field advantage with Aptive. All right, welcome back to the Loyal Cougars podcast. Jake Edmonds alongside Jonathan Tavernari. And we mentioned how important this Arizona game is. And it's really interesting because they just jumped into the top 25. And so, like, in terms of where they rank and in terms of, like, the strength of opponent, it's not inherently, one of the best BYU games that has been on the schedule in the last decade. But Robbie McCombs on X, and if you don't follow Robbie McCombs, he's one of the best follows for basketball takes. He said the Arizona game Tuesday is one of BYU's 5 to 10 biggest home games in the last decade. A win would essentially move BYU off the bubble and have them start playing for seeding. Arizona will be ranked and is 9-1 in Big 12. First game on ESPN this season. Massive opportunity for BYU. And my response to him was actually that it says more about what BYU's schedule against the WCC than it does about this game in particular. But that said, this game, and I think he's totally right. I think this is the implications of this game are huge, because if BYU loses the game, then you really start to try and count how many losses are remaining. I think BYU can lose 4 or 5 games this season and still potentially make the tournament, depending on what they do in the Big 12 tournament. And this would be one of them, right? And so if you can avoid a loss, if you can get a win, then it completely flips the script, right? I think, as Robbie said, this puts BYU, firmly into the tournament and off the bubble. And not only that, but the fact that it's on ESPN, it's at home. I think there's so many implications with this game, even though they are just a top 20 team. And I say just because that's still impressive, but they're not Gonzaga top 10 or top 5 or St. Mary's, when they were top 15. But it's still such a big game.
So I feel like the implications of this game are massive because, one, let me actually look into this ESPN rankings. I don't know if you have that up there, but I'm looking it up.
Yeah, I think they're 20, but I could be looking at a former week, but I'm pretty sure they're 20.
Oh, yeah, it looks like they're 20th on the AP, which is the only one we care about. And so looking at them, to me, there's 2 parts to this, Jake, that makes the game massive, 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 and that makes such a big statement win if BYU wins. And that is, 1, Arizona is ranked in the top 20. That's number 1. But number 2, they are first place of the Big 12. And you get to knock off the first place team at home. Good grief, guys. They are 9-1 in the Big 12 this year. Do you know how difficult that is? Like, is it impossible? It's not impossible, because BYU had a few bunnies that they missed that they could have easily be, instead of being 6-4, they could be 8-2 right now.
Yeah.
Right. And a win against Dan would put them in, tied for first, second place. But to me, the key here is if BYU wins that game, then BYU enters the conversation to be on one of the top 4 seeds of the Big 12 tournament, which gets them a two game bye.
Yeah,
which is massive, because then if they win one game in the Big 12 tournament, they go to the semifinals. And so, to me, those are the implications that are at stake. Now, Coach Rose always used to say, the most important game in the schedule is the next one we play. And they're absolutely right, because if you beat Arizona and then you lay an egg later on against Kansas State at home or against Arizona State at home, if you drop those, then all of you've done against Baylor and Arizona, it goes out of the window. Yeah. All of the road win against UCF goes out of the window. But if they stay on this trajectory, right, and they have 11 games left, right? I believe that they have 11 games left. And so out of those 11 games, it could possibly be 10 as well. I'm confirming right now. But BYU, I think they have 10 games left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They have 10 games left. Let's just say they beat Arizona. And then between Cincinnati and West Virginia, they win another one. That's 2. Kansas State at home, that's 3. Against Kansas, you toss it up. At Arizona, you toss it up. Arizona State 4, West Virginia at home 5. lo and behold, if these dudes go 6-4 or 7-3 at the last 10 games, we're talking about them being a top 4 team in the Big 12. They get a 2-game bye, and I cannot imagine that they are worse than a 5 or 6 seed come Selection Sunday.
Again, that's so wild considering where they were after they had lost to Utah. And you mentioned 9-1 being tough.
Sorry to interrupt you, but isn't it crazy? Like, just to build on this point, isn't it crazy to compare the season from last year and this year? And now we're going, oh my gosh, they really may be in a better place than last year, because 2 weeks ago we're like, always lost and hell broke loose, right?
Yeah. And what's funny last year is that I think coming out of preseason or pre-conference play, people thought BYU was, the best team in the conference potentially. And so expectations were high coming into the season. And granted, expectations were high coming in this season as well. But I think people realized it's a new coach. You got new players. You got freshmen. Let's kind of pump the brakes a little bit. It's a really weak pre-conference schedule. And when they lost, I think to, Texas Tech was fine. When they lost to TCU, it felt like, oh man, maybe this team's just not ready to gel. Like maybe they're just all too young. It's a new system. And so they haven't really adjusted to it. And literally within 2 weeks, the script has flipped to the point where it feels like they are now all of a sudden playing, at least in the last 2 weeks, playing like a top 5 team in the conference, which again, after that Utah loss, it felt like they were bottom 4 in the conference. So they flipped it around as fast as they have, which is wild to me. And for Arizona, by the way, to go 9-1 in the Big 12, I think it's tough for any team to go 9-1 in any conference. You look at BYU and the WCC. When did they go 9-1 in that conference? And that's the WCC. Granted, there are 2 teams, but it's very top loaded. I think BYU.
What is the WCC? I have no recollection what that means. I don't understand what that means. What is the WCC? I've never heard of it.
Some period of time that it's kind of fuzzy.
Is that what the dark ages were of BYU basketball? I don't remember now. Is that
correct? There were 2 other teams in that conference, but I just can't remember. But anyway, yeah, so it's Arizona to go 9-1. It says a lot about how well they're playing, especially in conference play. Now they had some questionable losses, I think, earlier in the year, but the way they're playing right now, and not only that, but the way they're beating teams, right? They're scoring 80 points a game. They have the second highest scoring margin in the conference. They're the best shooting team, and they're the 3rd best at defending. So they're not only great at putting the ball in the hoop, but they can also keep you from putting the ball in the hoop. They're 5th at getting the free throw line. They don't send you to the free throw line. They're 2nd best in rebounding behind Kansas, and they have the highest assist to turnover ratio in the conference. Now that's just as a team, right? Then you start looking at their individual players. Caleb Love is getting a lot of attention this year. Redshirt senior. I don't know if it's a redshirt, but if it's a COVID year, but he's a super senior, right? This is a 2nd year, playing as a senior. And he is, for all intents and purposes, their best scorer, their best offensive player, 16 points a game. And BYU is going to have their hands full. Now, you look at a guy like Mag again. We go back to Mag. He's a guy that you can stick on Caleb Love and, maybe not shut him down, but similar to what he did with VJ, make it difficult on him. And if Caleb Love has an off game, there's really not anybody else in terms of production this year that has shown capable of being able to kind of fill in that high production spot. It's Caleb Love and everybody else for that team.
Well, so I don't disagree with you, right? And I think there's a reason why he left Carolina to go there, right? Which we were all going like, what the crap just happened, right? And so because who leaves Carolina? And so, but when I look at this team and I look at the way that Arizona's playing right now, obviously, their leader is Caleb Love, but obviously, Awaka is a massive rebounder. Bradley, he is not to the same level as Yegor, but he is a quick guard, and he is someone that you have to keep an eye on, and you have to be ready for him. And so it's not like we can just go and say, oh, great, whatever. I mean, at 6'3", Bradley is going to be – he's not going to be as offensive and as aggressive as probably Wright was or probably as Edgecombe was. But there's no way that they're watching that film and going, wait, we have one of these guys. And this is Jaden Bradley, and he has the rock on his hand a lot. And so if I were game planning for Arizona, right? For BYU, and I'm Arizona, I'm going, Caleb, Jaden, you guys are going to go, because that's how Baylor stayed in the game, right? And so is it going to work? I don't know. But again, to your point, right? They go as far Caleb goes, but it does take a village. And they don't get to 9-1 without just having one single stud. You know what I mean? As you look at the way that they've been playing and as a team, this is a handful. They have a lot of different pieces that I feel like as they come into this BYU game, they're not a bunch of scrubs. They are 9-1 in Big 12 play. Like, that's not nothing. Like, you have to respect that. You know what I mean? Like, 9-1 in the hardest conference in basketball. And so, I feel like, Caleb Love may be John Lennon, but, there is, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and the other one, which is George. Their George is pretty good. And so you have to make sure that you respect that team, because they're going to be a handful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't mean to call them scrubs per se, because again, they are scoring 80 points a game. He's getting 16 of them. So who's getting the other, 64? And you know who I think, you haven't mentioned a guy, I actually think their X factor is going to be their 3-point shooter, Anthony Dell'Orso, because BYU this season has traditionally defended the three pretty poorly. I think overall defensively they've been pretty good, but defending the three they've struggled in terms of giving up open shots from beyond the arc. Anthony Dell'Orso, he's a 44% 3-point shooter this season. Now he has gone 0 of 7 in their last two games. Granted, they won. They beat Arizona State last week, but he's kind of been in a slump. But if he can turn it on, then that adds another weapon for Caleb Love to find. Now, Caleb Love, by the way, I mentioned his scoring, but he does take care of the ball and he does assist as well. And so, as you mentioned, the other guys on the team aren't scrubs, but if you can shut down Caleb, the way that Mag has essentially been able to shut down, or at least make it more difficult on the opposing team's best offensive players, then I think you put a little bit of a cog in the wheel of that offense. I think the offense obviously runs through Caleb, and if you can shut him down in terms of scoring production and in terms of finding his open teammates, then you make it more difficult. Yes, obviously they have players that can still score, and they're still probably going to put up their numbers, but this would be a huge lift for BYU, a huge challenge for BYU defensively if they can pull this off. Why should you have to choose between style and repping your team? Wooden Grail is bridging the gap between modern fashion and college fandom. Their hats and apparel are made with premium materials like suede and corduroy, featuring bold, unique designs that let you show off your team pride without sacrificing your look. Whether you're at the game or out on the town, Wooden Grail lets you do both. Check them out at woodengrail.com and step up your fan game. Use code CougarBoard for free shipping on any order. Continuing our conversation about BYU basketball, I wanted to hone in on a couple guys. And these are guys that you've mentioned last week when talking about BYU basketball and their success. We'll start with Dallin Hall, because I think a lot of people have been kind of down on Dallin. And we've talked about him before being kind of this quintessential teammate for BYU, and how he's always like happy for his guys, right? I think he's a great teammate for his players, but as far as production on the court, he has obviously regressed from last year. But you tweeted this last week. You said Dallin Hall is so underrated, and I can't remember exactly what moment. I'm pretty sure it was during a game. I don't remember what moment it was during the game. But can you elaborate what you mean by Dallin Hall being underrated?
So let me answer that by asking you a question. At the last few games, what is the lineup that's on the floor to close out the games, to close out halves? At the clutch moment of the games, who's on the court?
Yeah, Dallin.
It's Dallin. Now, it's Dallin, it's Rich, it's Richie, it's Trevin, it's Mag, and it's Foos and or Keba. But most likely it's Foos. And the reason for that is because, leadership is a real thing. Experience is a real thing. Now, the reason why I say Dallin is underappreciated is because there is so much attention given to Yegor, and rightfully, correctly so. But we need to be a society. We need to be a fan base where, we're not going Yegor and Dallin and Yegor, and you need to be here because they're two completely different players. At any other year of BYU basketball history, aside from this year and next year, any other year, Elijah Crawford and Brody Kozlowski are the talk of the town. 4-star, top 90, 80, 70 ESPN recruits coming to Provo out of high school. Our minds would have been like this. It just so happens that this year you have a once-in-a-generation player in Yegor. And next year you have once-in-a-lifetime situation with the number one player in the country coming to BYU. So what does that make of Dallin? Well, that makes is Dallin is consistent. Dallin is doing what he does. Dallin, set aside Richie ascension to stardom this year. Dallin was the best returning player for BYU last year. He was. I mean, that's point blank. It's not exaggerating. But Yegor came back. Yegor came to BYU.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I say that Dallin is underrated is because Dallin Hall is a great basketball player. Is he a bucket getter? No. Is he going to deliver you a 20 and 15 game? No. But in life, people fail to really appreciate people that get the job done. And Dallin is someone that gets the job done at a very high level, offensively and defensively. And so because of that, I say that Dallin is underrated. Forget about NIL money. Forget about all of that. When you look at Dallin Hall, the player, he is a point of consistency, a point of reference for this team, where he brings leadership and he brings a peace and it brings a calm and a cool-headed to tough moments. And so to me, that's what makes him underrated. And that's what makes him a very key piece of this team.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that about Dallin finishing games, because I think a lot of fans were up in arms about the Baylor game and the fact that Cannon wasn't in during most of crunch time, right? Clutch time, which is, the most pivotal part of the game. And I think it's because Kevin recognized that, yes, Cannon's playing well, but Cannon is still a freshman. And he needed guys that could handle that pressure moment. And he knows Dallin is a guy that can do that. And so for you to mention the fact that, he obviously finished out both of those games, and he hit I think people forget he hit a clutch shot against Baylor. I don't know if it was
a step back in the second half to cool their run.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was pivotal. Like, I think that was his only shot attempt all game. I may be wrong there, but I think he went 1 for 1, at least 1 for 1 from 3. And that was the shot he made. And what I love about Dallin is that he's not a volume guy. Now, he was kind of last year. I think he shot, he shot more, obviously quite a bit more last year. But I think he's content right now with not being that guy. And it's great to watch. All right, that's going to do it for us from the Aptive Podcast Studios. Special thanks to Jonathan Tavernari for hopping on and talking hoops with us. This is the Loyal Cougars Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds. We'll see you next week.